Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the go-to podcast for parents with multiple kids, especially those with twins, triplets, or more, who are navigating the maze of modern family life and personal finance. Whether you're overwhelmed by education or retirement planning, parenting dilemmas, career transitions, or trying to define your purpose and plan, we're here to guide you with empathy, encouragement, and expertise. Hosted by Paul Fenner, founder of Tama Capital, a certified financial planner and parent to 4 kids, including a set of triplets. Our podcast is your ally in the quest for financial peace of mind, proving that money matters, but family comes first. Subscribe now and join our community of empowered parents at tamacapital.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Tama may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What does comprehensive financial planning even mean? At Tama Capital, it means a family office where lifestyle planning such as retirement, college, portfolio management, and tax prep and planning are all under one umbrella. But it goes beyond numbers. We focus as much on the emotional side of financial planning as we do on the financial side. We get you. We understand your challenges of building a family, business or career, and a healthy life. We are devoted to wealth planning for families like yours because we are you. Learn how our family can help your family by visiting tamacapital.com. Are you keeping score in your relationships with your spouse, kids, or friends? I welcome back our resident therapist expert, Dr. Jennifer Dragonette, for an eye-opening conversation about the ways our perspectives can change every aspect of our relationships at home and beyond. Dr. Jen introduces us to this idea of positive versus negative sentiment override. And yeah, it's a mouthful, but it's all about how we subconsciously gather evidence to support the stories we're telling ourselves about our partners, our kids, or even our coworkers, and how that can tip our emotional balance for better or worse. We dig in and make some interesting connections to my world of financial planning, comparing these emotional patterns to the affirmation bias investors often face. There are many parallels between financial planning and managing emotions, particularly in breaking old habits, letting go of scorekeeping, and learning to see the positive in the people we care about the most. If you're a parent struggling with expectations, a partner trying to reconnect, or just someone looking for more balance, I think you'll find this conversation both relatable and practical. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Jennifer Dragonette. All right, Dr. Jen, welcome back. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Paul. How are you today?
I am doing great with the side of, as I mentioned before we started recording, making lemonade out of lemons with life right now. But as I also tell people, all first world problems, and 99% of most Americans would trade places with me in a heartbeat. So, but I think it kind of just goes to underscore like what we talked about last month with one of these themes that has come out of my planning season over the last couple months. I mean, we're recording this in October. It'll probably come out in November. Just this lifestyle wise, like a lot of the families that I work with are in similar life stages that you and I are in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, multiple kids, chasing them all over, trying to, have time to pour into your career, have time to pour into your spouse, and those hours just kind of evaporate in the day. And so I'm really looking forward to our conversation today because this is a topic that you and your husband Tony have brought up about something that you guys have been seeing in the couples that you've been working with in your therapy practices, which is this positive versus negative sentiment. And so I didn't know anything about this until we kind of just started talking about this before we hit record. But the way that you went about explaining it, it kind of like this aha, like light bulb moment went off. So I'm going to turn it over to you and kind of have you walk us through like what that means and then get into that moment that I just like, I just understood what you were saying about this.
Great. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic. And My husband and I are both fortunate enough to be therapists, to both do couples therapy and individual therapy. And, this idea of a positive and negative sentiment override, it shows up in the couples I work with. It also shows up in the individuals I work with as they talk about their relationships, both romantic, intimate relationships and also friendships and family relationships. So what I mean by that, and this term really comes from John Gottman, who's done a lot of couples research and informs a lot of the way that I work with couples.
Of course, it has to come from that man.
Of course, right? I mean, he's so prolific and so right on with the evidence-based work that shows up over and over again in relationships. So this idea of let's start with a positive sentiment override. So a positive sentiment override is not exactly the same thing as new relationship energy, but we see it in the beginning of relationships a lot. So that's often the way that I start talking about this conversation. So positive sentiment override, if we can imagine the beginning of an important relationship of ours, let's imagine a romantic relationship, but this could certainly be a friendship too. We get to know someone, we really like them, or we're interested in them. Maybe if there's romance, there's chemistry going off. And so we find ourselves looking for evidence that this person is amazing. And we can find it, right? We'll collect it. They text us something really funny and we say, oh, they're so funny, as a trait, right? They are this way. And so we put that positive characteristic into a forever bucket of how this person is. And we just are collecting those. Oh, they're so generous. They are so family oriented, right? So we're kind of compiling this list of wonderful traits of theirs as though they are forever who this person is. And then if something negative shows up, we find a way for it not to matter as much. Oh, yeah, they were late, but they had something going on. Or, oh, that was kind of a rude comment, but I know that they were really tired today. We kind of write it off. It's not who they are permanently. So that's what a positive sentiment override looks like. And we can find examples of this all over the place. Often we do this with our children or with, coworkers who we really care about because we want to connect to people and attach to them. By contrast, a negative sentiment override, which doesn't have to be time-based, and yet I do often see this happen as relationships progress, where we get out of that, limerence for 6 months of a relationship, everything is amazing and wonderful. Maybe years pass and now we're bumping into each other in the kitchen and, forgetting little important things and all of that. And we can
hopefully with no knives.
Hopefully with no knives. Although I will say, I don't know what it is about kitchens. No matter how big the kitchen is, we always want to be in the exact same spot, right?
Yeah.
Like, I need to be at the sink. I need to be in the fridge. So the negative sentiment override is exactly the opposite in both of those ways. And this is why it's really painful. When we have a negative sentiment override, or what's called a negative perspective, we start looking for and scanning for, unconsciously, typically, not consciously, all the ways that our partner is not showing up for us, all the ways that they're messing up. And we put those into the forever trait bucket of that person. Oh, Paul's always so inconsiderate, right? He's always so rude. He doesn't care about XYZ that I care about. And we'll do the same unfortunate thing in reverse with the positive things. So when we're in that negative sentiment override, if somebody does something generous, we're suspicious of it, right? Why are they doing that? They must have some ulterior motive. Or, they do something thoughtful. We're like, well, that's because they knew I was upset with them and they wouldn't have done that if I hadn't asked for it, right? So we're taking all of those traits that we used to think were wonderful and amazing about them, and we're making them something temporary that's not really true about them. And then we're scanning for and looking for evidence that they're not on our side, that they're not supporting us, and we'll find it. So, the powerful thing about thinking of our relationships in this context is, it kind of boils down to we will find what we're looking for. Right? If we're looking for signs that our partner is amazing and wonderful, we'll find them. We chose them for a reason, for the most part, right? If we're in a healthy relationship, healthy enough, we'll find that positive evidence. We can certainly find all the negative evidence too. So, sometimes this is that kind of light bulb aha moment for couples, because it helps us realize that really we are creating the reality that we see and feel in our relationships.
So when listening to you go through that, there's bringing it back to my world in terms of financial planning and really portfolio management. is this concept called affirmation bias. So we're looking for things that support whatever position that we're in. So for example, like I buy Apple stock, for example. And so once I own it, I'm always typically, I don't do this personally, but so I'm just using this example as listeners, so don't hold this to me or against me, is that you start to begin to look for everything that's positive about Apple rather than what's potentially going wrong or negative about Apple. And it can really throw shade. I don't know if that sounds like a Taylor Swift language, but maybe I'm hanging out with my kids too much now, where you're just looking for that positive bias, and it's distorting the real view. Richard Thaler has done a lot of work on these biases when it comes to investment and financial planning, and it works, I think, very similar to what you just described.
Mm-hmm. It really does. And I think, one really important thing to kind of tease out of that is, in the financial world and in the investment world, we need to have this kind of neutral stance, right? That we want to be, investing where it makes sense to, not where we emotionally feel like we are supposed to be and make it work no matter what. So we have to find that, that affirmation of where we've put our money, right? That's potentially really dangerous financially because, these aren't emotional decisions. These aren't, love-based decisions. We can sell a stock, buy a different stock, right? We can work with our financial planners to shift where we're investing. And we're not looking at the end of a relationship or, splitting up a family or something. These are meant to be more rational, cognitive decisions. If we are in a relationship that we really want to work, that we really want to continue, we can't be approaching it like that every day where we're saying, well, the net today was 80% positive and 20% negative in this marriage. So, I'm going to take
it's like
a break.
Holding score.
Right. Exactly. And we see a lot of that scorekeeping when we're in more of a negative sentiment override. I was just talking with one of my clients about this, of how do I get out of this kind of tit for tat? Well, you
I was just going to ask you, how do you get out?
Yeah. Well, I think a couple ways. One is oftentimes we are, and this again, sometimes happens more when we're in that negative perspective space. We might be kind of silently holding a lot of our, those paper cuts that I usually call them, those little moments of, oh, I didn't like that, or, wow, that didn't work, or, well, that was unfair, or, that was hypocritical. We're storing it away. And then it often comes out in this blast when, our partner or our friend has a complaint with us. It comes out as a very defensive, oh yeah, well, you, blah, 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 right? All the 6 things that I've been waiting to bring up with you. So one way to circumvent that tit for tat is to work on, kind of an exposure therapy, brave, courageous approach of mentioning these things when you notice them rather than storing them away, because it's typically a lot less heated. Kind of like, oh, ouch, I didn't like that. Or, oh, I really would have preferred if we did it this way, rather than, at the end of the month, here's my list of grievances, right? And I think the other thing that we can do is to get as deliberate about the positivity in the relationship as we are about the negativity. So, a little bit different than what we were talking about with the market, but not entirely. That, if we have a negative slant, and, just to take a quick detour here, the reason that we do typically have a negative slant in all of our thinking is because we're wired that way. We're wired to look for the threat. We're wired to look for all the danger in our life. And, when we're in that excitement, new relationship mode with relationships, that really gets suppressed because we want to connect, right? And that drive to attach and that drive to find our person is stronger in those moments than the drive to protect ourselves for the most part. And we could have all sorts of asterisks. If we have a relationship trauma, it probably feels different. If we're in a relationship that's abusive, it's definitely going to feel different. So I'm kind of talking about the aggregate of most, typical healthy enough relationships. But over time, then our mind shifts to, how am I going to get hurt here, right? How am I going to be damaged? Let me protect myself as though we can. We can't really, right? But let me wall up so that I don't get surprised by how inconsiderate you are or how late you always are, right? I knew that about you. So it feels like we're protecting ourselves to stack up all of this evidence that this person is so awful. And yet we want to love them, right? We're married to them, or we're committed to them, or we're co-parenting with them. And we really do love them. We want this to feel better in the relationship. So we have to make a very deliberate shift in the way that we're thinking, which is hard to do. We have to first notice that we're doing that negative perspective thing. We can't change it unless we know it. And then it's really about choosing to find those moments of connection, choosing to highlight, even better, say out loud, wow, I really appreciate it and noticed that you did this thing or that you showed up this way for me. To start to just right size and rebalance that evidence base that we have, where it's always going to be tilted toward what's not working. So we have to go out of our way to highlight and notice the things that really are.
So, in listening to you talk about this, I know I'm on slippery slope when I'm going to go down this road, but from a parenting perspective, because as my kids have gotten older, and so my triplets are freshmen in high school now, and then Mac is in 8th grade, is I noticed that I do this with them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And to some degree, it's gotten worse as they've gotten older, because I guess like I've ratcheted up my expectations of them and what I expect them to be doing, like their one weekly chore, or to make sure that they're, studying for the exams or turning in their assignments for school, all those different things. And when they're not doing those things, I feel like I'm the ultimate scorekeeper, where it's like, okay, if you're not going to do these things, then I'm taking this away. I'm taking a phone away, I'm taking an Xbox away, things of that nature, which seems to be incredibly hard now because the schools use their phones for like everything. And so I actually told them this like a few weeks ago. I'm like, one area where I feel like I could always get your attention is when I took your phone away. But now, like I feel like my hands are even tied with doing that because you quote unquote need it for school. But I think there's I do as much scorekeeping with them than I do with Teresa.
Yeah. Well, it's a really, really important point that you're bringing up. And I want to differentiate between, behavior and traits for a second, because I think that's often where we can find a little relief and comfort as parents. We've talked about with attachment before, having high expectations for your kids is actually really important. I'm glad that you do. We need them. And for people who grew up without high expectations, that doesn't feel very good. That kind of more permissive parenting that sometimes parents think is kinder or, more supportive. It implies to our children that we don't think they can do very much, or, that we don't think they can rise to this occasion. So, it's always a bit of a balance. We want to keep those high expectations and, make them realistic, but also like a little bit of a stretch, because that's how people grow. And, I think either way, right, with our partners or with our children, we can separate out the behavior from who they are as a person. And this is a bit of some of the Gottman research too. We've talked about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that show up in relationships, and 2 of them are criticism and contempt, which are along the same spectrum. They're problematic, and we'll notice that one of the horsemen isn't complaints. Right? We are allowed to do what I was just saying of, oh, hey, it really would mean a lot to me if you put the dishes away. Or, gosh, I was really frustrated that I got home and, this thing hadn't happened that you told me was going to happen. Right? That's an expectation. That's behavior. We're allowed to have reactions about that and ask for that to be different. What we don't want to do is say, you're always so forgetful. Right? You never
That's
do.
the key word, is always.
And you, right? Like, you are now this person who I think of as forgetful, as opposed to, I was really disappointed that you forgot that thing. Right? That's a behavior versus a trait of that person. And, with either of these categories, and I'm happy to dive into them more, what we appreciate, we get more of. So that's more where we can tap into that positive sentiment override with either the behaviors or what we're seeing as a person. Teenagers are going to be frustrating and not do all the things. And when they do, if we say, that is so awesome, thanks for doing such a great job on that, I'm really impressed with how hard you worked on that, we're going to get more of that behavior. And then if we can use that scanning in a positive way to say, wow, you are really showing up these days. I'm really seeing that you're making an effort when I tell you something's important to me, or, it's meaning a lot to me how much you're willing to tell me about your day at the end of your school day or whatever. We're noticing those positive things because they're happening, right? And I think this is where, I always want to, again, come back to, in a healthy enough relationship, these things are probably happening too. We're just typically, as parents or as partners, noticing the things that aren't happening the way that we want to. And when we hyper focus on that, we're going to get reactions to that thing, but we're not going to get, actual shifts in the behaviors that we want. We're just going to kind of indicate that this isn't making me happy, right? So we want to try to find all of it, right? Particularly with our kids, we want to try to find, where do I need to continue to hold these expectations for you and encourage you because I know you can do it? And where do I want to say, wow, I just love what a great friend you are, right? I'm noticing how you showed up for this person. That makes me so proud of you as a parent, right? Or spouse. Like right before our appointment today, Paul, I come in the room and my big light and my microphone are set up for me by my husband, right? And I texted him like, thank you so much. That means so much to me. That just saved me, 5 minutes. Those little things, right? If I don't notice that, or if I'm like, yeah, but he didn't put the dishes away, right?
Right.
I'm not gonna continue to receive that behavior, and because he's not gonna know it's important or it's not gonna be appreciated. So, if I'm in a negative sentiment override, I could say, well, that's because he knew I was, running late this morning or whatever it is. Or in a positive perspective, I could say, that is such a loving gesture, right? He knows that removes some stress for me in the morning. It was, he's putting himself in my mind and thinking what's important to me. He's always so thoughtful, right? So we get that forever bucket just with like one little thing that could easily have gone in the other direction if I was in a different mindset around it, right? Same behavior, different reaction for me.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's something like I personally struggle with is like breaking that. And because I get told by parents all the time, like, oh my gosh, you have like the greatest kids. And like two of my two boys, they actually work at one of our local Kroger grocery store. And I get comments about them often about how, people will run into them at the grocery store and they're actually talkative and polite. And it's like I hear from teachers all like every year that you send your kids to school, we get the best of them, we send them home and you get the worst.
Yep. Exactly. Right. And even in, not to put you in the spotlight, but even the way you said it, like they're actually talkative, right? Like there's this kind of like, oh yeah, you get the talkative version of them, right?
Right. And I actually had a conversation. I was in the store like last Friday, I think, and with one of my boys, and I was talking to the lady, and she was going on about how, I'll just name names, like Aiden, who's usually our quiet one, like talks all the time. I'm like, no, you're talking about this kid right next to me, Andrew. And she's like, no. I know the difference between the two now. It took me like a few months because they're identical twins, but no, it's like, I'm like, are you sure? And she went on and on about like everything he talks about. And it's like, holy crap. Like I can barely get a word out of that kid sometimes.
Yep.
And but on one hand, it made me like really happy. Like, oh, that he actually is probably more extroverted or more talkative than I guessed. But then it kind of came back and reflected on me. I'm like, well, what am I not doing at home for him not to be able to open up to me?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that, Paul. And I love that you're getting that feedback from the teachers too, right? Like we get the best of them and you get the worst or the harder parts. oftentimes that happens because they don't have to be anything other themselves when they're with us as parents, when they're home and comfortable, and particularly teenagers. I have these conversations a lot with parents of teens. We're going to see, and I have a teenager now too, we're going to see the more sullen side sometimes, or the really exhausted side, or the quiet side, or the part that needs to just go in their room and close the door. And, it's a both and here, because as parents, I want to connect in that way. I was just at my son's soccer game the other day, and I said to my husband, "Oh, when he's with his friends, like this is when he's smiling and laughing and coming alive. Like I get to see it now. It's really nice, because I don't get to see that as much at home, and that's just normal. It's painful for us as parents, and yet 100% developmentally appropriate for kids to be more withdrawn at home, more sullen right now, more, introspective, trying to figure out who they are and how they want to relate. And when they go to school, when they go to work, their jobs, when they're with their friends are a little bit different. But I think, school and jobs, they're trying on a different outfit. They're trying on this public persona. They're, even if they really love school or their work or their friends, it's a different, more public role for our kids. And I think as adults, we get used to this kind of shape shifting a little bit more, but kids are still working that out. And, we often see that when they come home, and this is even true for little kids, it's when they can just kind of, right? It's like adults, like we unbutton our pants and we just kind of sit on the couch. Kids go into the mode that is actually most natural for them. And so, the long and the short of it is, when I'm in a positive sentiment override around it, I actually take it as a compliment. Like, oh, you're comfortable enough around me that you don't have to put on the mask. You don't have to put on the straight A student set of clothes, right? You can cry. You can let me know you're frustrated with things. You can let me know you need space. I take that as such a gesture of trust and confidence in our relationship, even though it feels really yucky. And I would love to have the, performative, smiley, jokey version. I know that's not all of them.
Yeah, and I think I've probably said this time and time again, especially like during our conversations, is that I think the other challenging thing or aspect for parents who have like multiple kids, whether it's twins or triplets, is you have this kind of like unique petri dish where they're, for the most part, going to be all different. Yeah. And trying not to get into comparisons and this whole scorekeeping that we talked about, positive versus negative sentiment, because one will do something exceptional and another will do something else totally exceptional, or I don't know if the word's deceptional or not, but like the opposite direction. And it's really easy to compare like what one's doing versus the other. And I think hopefully that's something that Teresa and I have recognized and tried to, as parents, like back off and not compare it. And I think that's been one of the greatest transitions for the triplets going to high school this year, is that although it makes it incredibly challenging for us from a scheduling standpoint right now, all three of them went different ways. Like they all do a different activity. They actually have all different friends, and it's great. It's good to see them flourish and grow, and learn about new relationships that they have and things that they're excited about or learning. But I wish I could just still dial back on that damn scorekeeping aspect.
I know it is really hard. And I was just saying to one of my clients the other day who has a toddler and is currently pregnant, like the only thing we know is that the second child is going to be different than the first one. We don't know how. We don't know in what ways, right? But they will not be exactly the same. And that'll be terrifying and exciting and, maddening and confusing and all of that. And I think that's part of the mystery and the just, kind of mind-bogglingness of parenting is we get to watch these people develop into who they are. And, with that, the scorekeeping part or the comparison part, I appreciate you naming that, because I think a lot of parents really struggle with that. Our kids are going to be different. One of them is going to be really good at something. The other one isn't probably going to be as good at. Maybe they don't even want to do that. Or, One might be much more public about what they do. Like I have one of my children is way more into sports than the other. And, so people ask me, how are your kids? And, it's kind of like, well, I know what to say about one of them. And the other one is an amazing person. It's just much more internal. And so I could tell you about his writing or, the way that he creates stories, but it's not going to be like the pictures on the soccer field. And, so when we're looking for that positive sentiment with our children, oftentimes what I'm looking for or advising people to look for is what are they working on, right? What are they really trying to improve? How are they trying to grow? How are they showing a growth mindset where they recognize that they're not fully formed or they're willing to do something even if they're not good at it in the beginning? That's where we usually get the most leverage as parents rather than saying, oh, you are such a natural at this, right? How do you just make that look so easy? That's fine, but it also, doesn't really encourage anybody to keep going with that. It's like, oh, okay, great. I'm good at soccer. I'm good at running. But if we say, wow, you worked so hard on that specific shot and I could see it improve over the course of your season, or, I really could notice like at the end of that race, your kick came in because I know you've been practicing that. Like that's really paying attention and what we appreciate, we get more of. So in that situation, we're going to get more of the effort rather than more of the, well, I guess I just have to continue to be naturally good at this thing.
That's a really good point. And it wouldn't be one of our conversations without saying the word awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Exactly.
It really comes back to, and so on that aspect, I feel like, being aware of what's going on, the scorekeeping, the negative, the positive sentiment is really key. And it's always that next hardest step, I guess. Mm-hmm. Just like in financial planning, like I think the hardest step is for somebody just to walk in my door or call me or knock on my door, I should say, to get started, because there's so much fear and trepidation in front of that decision. And I'm wondering like what it is about the parenting that we can do to, I guess I'll use the word override, but I don't know if that's the right word, to get past that and to really push ourselves once we know that we have this awareness of what's going on, how to actually do things different or try different things to try to, really understand like where they're going and where, like you just said, like where they want to grow. Because that to me is like one of my favorite takeaways from this conversation is maybe asking that question in that way or in a different way, because I don't necessarily know. Like I know, like for Madison, for example, who's my swimmer, like I always know like where she wants to go, but like my boys, not quite sure, and I think that's a question I don't think I've asked, or at least I haven't asked in this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting if we hold it kind of lightly, that idea of growth, it opens up a lot of options. Maybe I want to grow in this very specific way in this sport or in this musical instrument. As a parent, what I'm really excited about is maybe I'm seeing growth in someone's distress tolerance, and their ability to stick with something when it's hard, doesn't matter what it is, or in their willingness to kind of be humble. And, one of my kiddos is a great musician and just picked up an entirely new instrument. And, as a parent, I'm like, oh, but you're so good at the other one, right? Yeah. Let's just do the thing you're good at. And so I had to kind of watch myself and, do this exact same kind of work where like, okay, you might actually be more talented. I could only play one instrument. You might be able to do two or three, right? And how incredible that you're brave enough to be brand new at something in public, right? So, for me, that's the growth. I'm like, wow, you're willing to stand up and do something that you're a complete beginner at in a public setting where you could just do the thing you're already good at, right? That's growth. So I think sometimes just getting a little more flexible with how we define, growth or progress. Sometimes it's actually, can you try something that you don't think you can do? Or are you willing to be brave? Or are you willing to, show up for a friend who really needs you? It may not be these kind of checkmark accomplishments that we're looking for, or that we, should, in quotes, be looking for.
Well, once again, I think we covered a wide gamut of relationships, marriage, parenting in this conversation. So hopefully hopefully it leaves people thinking of what they can do next and having that awareness of, am I in that positive versus negative sentiment mode? And, if I'm in one, how do I try to strike some harmony or balance between the two?
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Yeah. Always great to talk with you, Paul.
Yeah, you too, Dr. Jen. I appreciate it. And we'll look forward to seeing you next month.
Okay, sounds good.
I don't know if I shared way too much personal things about me in that conversation with Dr. Jen, but I hope it's relatable. I hope when you're listening to these conversations, especially with Dr. Jen, that there's always one, maybe two things that you can take away from this conversation. And part of it's realizing that you're not alone. After spending the last 6 to 7 weeks with my families here at Tama Capital, doing their strategic reviews, having conversations about what's going well, what's a struggle with their lives, with their kids, with their career, with their financial ambitions or expectations. It's a roller coaster of emotions. And as Dr. Jen pointed out, we find what we are looking for. And in relationships, if we're scanning for the positive, we'll find it. But if we're expecting the negative, well, we'll see that as well. Our perceptions create our relational reality, if you will. The other thing I want to point out or take away from this conversation is something that comes up time and time again. Awareness is always step one. Change starts with simply noticing our biases and our patterns. Whether it's overcoming scorekeeping, like we talked about a lot, whether it's with your spouse or your kids, or seeing past daily frustration, being aware opens the door for real connections and growth. Now that you've made it to the end of another great conversation, are you looking for more? If so, head over to tamacapital.com, where you will find all of our conversations. Use the search feature to find the topic or guest you would love to learn more about. Also, don't forget to make someone else's day by sharing our show. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.